Come learn about natural selection and its application to fictional squirrels, real-world viruses, and Star Trek nanites, starting now. Hello, my name is Mohammed Noor. I'm a biology professor at Duke University, and I'm an occasional science consultant for the Star Trek universe. I'm really excited to talk with you today about natural selection, the driver of tons of evolutionary change. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try to clear up some misconceptions, and I'm going to tell you how natural selection is mathematically inevitable. So with that, let's get started. In this episode of The Next Generation, called Evolution, young Wesley Crusher accidentally releases some microscopic robots called nanites on the ship. Now, these robots replicate by building copies of themselves. And over a few hours, the robots are not only really abundant, but they've evolved new skills and can even communicate? Whoa. Well, the episode title is Evolution, but the process by which they evolved is natural selection. That's what I want to introduce to you here today. So what is natural selection? Well, people hear expressions like survival of the fittest and think of competition or fights to the death. But natural selection is much simpler and really not necessarily violent. Natural selection is the process by which certain inherited traits get more abundant in a population because they increase survival or reproduction. So as you might guess, lots of traits affect survival or reproduction. They may be something like having a shell for safety, or having higher sperm counts, or they may be more subtle, like an enzyme in your gut working better, giving you more healthy nutrients. So let's use a fictional example. Imagine a population of squirrels. Let's say that some squirrels are attracted to roads, and other squirrels stay away from roads. So in a city with lots of busy streets, which kind of squirrels would survive better? Well, obviously the ones that avoided roads. Ones attracted to roads would meet a sad fate. Aww. Now let's take it a step further. Let's say there's a genetic tendency to whether squirrels are attracted to or avoid roads. So some squirrels, because of the gene variants they carry, are more likely to approach roads, while other squirrels are more likely to avoid roads. Which gene variants will get passed on to more offspring in the next generation? Well, this poor fella isn't passing on his gene variants to any more offspring, so the gene variants for avoiding roads should get more abundant over time. Yay! Now let's do a simple math example to see what happens over time, okay? Let's pretend that squirrels reproduce like genetically identical clones, and let's say every squirrel can make up to 4 baby clones. Let's say ones that avoid roads on average produce 4, while ones that approach roads produce only 2, since the other 2 maybe don't make it. Aww. And let's start with one squirrel of each type, okay? So in the first generation, we have one that avoids and one that approaches. So 50% of the squirrels avoid. In the next generation, the approaching one has 2 kids before she dies, and the avoiding one has 4 kids before she dies. So now we're at 66% of squirrels, or 4 out of 6, avoid roads. So let's do it again. Each of these 2 make 2 more, and we're at 4 approaching, and each of those 4 make 4 more, so we're at 16 avoiding. So now it's 80%, or 16 out of 20 squirrels avoid roads. And you can see as this keeps going, eventually, just about every squirrel you find will be of that type that avoids roads. That is natural selection in action. Now, one thing I want to stress, the squirrels that approach roads were doing fine in numbers. They were still doubling every generation. So for natural selection to work, you just have a type that is better. But it doesn't necessarily mean the other type was totally sickly or dead. If the avoiding roads type wasn't there, the road-loving squirrels would seem to be doing great. Now for natural selection to work, you have variation in a trait that affects survival or reproduction, and kids inherit that trait from their parents. With those elements, natural selection is mathematically inevitable. You almost can't avoid it happening. And in this case, we had just one advance, avoiding roads. Now, natural selection will keep causing more changes with future steps. Maybe future squirrels will be better at stockpiling seeds or better at eating acorns. So each of those traits would spread, and eventually squirrels would become quite different over many, many, many generations. And it's not just squirrels too. An example right now on a lot of people's minds is the spread of the so-called COVID-19 variants. So imagine a virus spreading, okay, and the body's immunity is fighting it. Then a mutation happens in one virus that makes it better at dodging immune responses. So that new type has more kids and becomes more common by natural selection. That seems to have happened in the virus SARS-CoV-2 with some of the so-called variants. So every living species experiences natural selection, and that includes us humans. Yay! Mutations that help adult humans digest milk spread by natural selection just within the past 10,000 years, so really recent. Other traits have spread in just a few human populations, like the ability to survive at high altitudes. There's a variant of a gene called EPAS1, which spread in Tibet a few thousand years ago, but it's much rarer in nearby mainland China. So it helps the people in Tibet survive the lower oxygen at high altitudes. So coming back to this Trek episode, these little nanite robots reproduce by replicating themselves. And every now and then, a copy may be accidentally different and potentially slightly better. Now, that copy would then have more offspring. And like I said, if you have variation in traits that affect survival or reproduction, and kids inherit those traits from their parents, then natural selection is mathematically inevitable. It doesn't matter if we're talking squirrels, or viruses, or nanite robots. In the case of these nanite robots, the changes may have involved something about how fast they can reproduce. In some cases, maybe some nanites had accidental changes that gave them basic communication skills that also helped them survive. And those skills would have been passed on to more of the next generation by natural selection too. This wasn't really elaborated, but the point is natural selection drove their evolutionary change. And again, even though natural selection wasn't discussed by name in the episode, it's still a cool illustration of this real-world process. Had you thought about natural selection in the context of those nanites before? And what did you think of that episode overall? Let us know in the comments, and thank you for tuning in to BioTrekkie Explains. See you next time!